Hi, and welcome to the Girlfriend God. My name is Kelly, and I'll be your host. Welcome, my fellow goddess lovers. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about Sophia and Asherah and the Shekinah. First, let me talk about Sophia a little bit. So, if you've never heard of Sophia, Sophia isn't a goddess as much as she is a concept, I guess. Some people have suggested that in Christian mysticism that Sophia is the third part of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost Trinity, that she is the Holy Ghost. Sophia appears in many passages of the Bible as the female personification of wisdom, and her roles and popularity in Judeo-Christian traditions have changed over time. She's also celebrated in Kabbalah, and if you're not familiar with Kabbalah, it's a form of Jewish mysticism, and she is celebrated in the Kabbalah as the female expression of God. Sophia has been venerated by various religious figures throughout history, including Hildegard of Bingen, who is also, like Sophia, represented at the dinner party. And the dinner party, if you're not familiar, was the first sort of epic feminist art installation in the 70s, put together by an artist named Judy Chicago, who I believe is still out there making art. And it was this massive dinner setting. There were long tables in the shape of a triangle, and there were, I believe, 48 or 49 place settings in the table, and all the place settings were for influential women in history, like Audre Lorde, but also included goddesses, and there was a place setting for this Hildegard of Bingen, and there was also a place setting for Sophia. And yeah, again, that's actually something really interesting to read about that I just learned about in doing research for this episode. So if you're interested, you can just go Googling and look for The Dinner Party by Judy Chicago. Some say that the dinner party was her rebellion against the Last Supper painting. So the dinner party kind of theologically addressed Sophia and the concept of divine female wisdom. And in nearly all representations of sacred wisdom in the Judeo-Christian tradition, some aspect of Sophia can be found. She even became integrated into the worship of the Virgin Mary in the Middle Ages, as did many other goddesses. There's actually an episode coming up all about the Virgin Mary and all the goddesses that went into creating her. So I'm going to tell you what it says in Wikipedia, which I double checked some of their references, and this seems accurate to me. My academic friends will correct me if any of this is incorrect, and that's why I love them. So Wikipedia this is the Wikipedia entry. Sophia is a central idea in Hellenistic philosophy and religion, Platonism, Gnosticism, and Christian theology. And I would add Kabbalah to that as well. Originally carrying a meaning of cleverness and skill, the later meaning of the term, closer to the meaning of phronesis, which means wisdom and intelligence, was significantly shaped by the term philosophy. And the term philosophy used by Plato means the love of wisdom. In the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, the feminine personification of divine wisdom as holy wisdom can refer either to Jesus Christ and the Word of God, as in the dedication of the Church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. I probably mispronounced Hagia, I don't know. Or to the Holy Spirit. References to Sophia in Koine, 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 Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible translate to the Hebrew term Shakma. So that's your Wikipedia entry about Sophia. I found this other article by a woman named Joyce Rupp on usacatholic.org, and she wrote this article January 4, 2016, and she says, the biblical feature of Sophia, or wisdom, is more than metaphor. She is an expression of the feminine aspects of God. Wow, for a Catholic to write that? She probably got in trouble. In the Greek translation, the words for holy wisdom are, here's that word again, Hagia. I'm going to go with Hagia. Hagia Sophia. Thomas Merton, who's a fabulous mystical poet that I highly recommend, he wrote about her in Emblems of a Season of Fury. And here's what he wrote. And it's so beautiful. The diffuse shining of God is Hagia Sophia. Sophia is gift, is spirit, donum Dei. She is God-given and God himself as gift. Sophia, in all things, is the divine life reflected in them. Wow, Thomas Merton, wow. So there's a book called The Book of Wisdom. Well, it's called the Book of Wisdom in the Latin Bible tradition, but it's also called the Wisdom of Solomon. And it's a book about wisdom, its benefits, nature, and role in ancient Israel's history. It's more of an exhortation to pursue wisdom rather than a collection of wise teaching. And in the Book of Wisdom, it describes Sophia guiding the Exodus people through the wilderness. It says, she led them by a marvelous road. She herself was their shelter by day and their starlight through the night. That's in Wisdom 10:17. Other references in the Bible. She is a teacher. Hear, for I will speak noble things. Take my instruction. That's from Proverbs 8:1-11. A mother. She brings up her own children. The tree of life. It's Proverbs 3-8. And true wealth. More precious than jewels. That's Proverbs 3:15. She's also described as a counselor, a fine mist, light, and the law. Wow. Sophia provides healing and shelter, gives rest, and offers what is needed for spiritual transformation. I'm still reading from this piece by Joyce Rupp. She goes on and says, the Hebrew Bible mentions several places where the presence of God was felt and experienced as a Shekinah. We're going to talk about the Shekinah later, including the burning bush and the cloud that rested on Mount Sinai. The Shekinah was often pictured as a cloud or as a pillar of fire and was referred to as the glory of God. The Shekinah was also understood to be present in the tabernacle and the temple in Jerusalem. And the Shekinah is also to be seated at the right hand of God. In classic Jewish thought, the Shekinah refers to a dwelling or settling in a special sense, a dwelling or settling of divine presence, to the effect that, while in proximity to the Shekinah, the connection to God is more readily perceivable. I'm going to digress and talk about the right hand of God. As long as I have physically felt, the presence of my goddess, which doesn't happen very often, but it seems to happen spontaneously. It happens when I'm struggling with something, but it also happens when I'm joyful. I don't know, it seems random to me. I'm sure it isn't to her. But anyway, when I have that physical sensation of her laying a hand gently on my shoulder, it's always on my right shoulder, and I can always feel her presence right behind my right shoulder. And I wondered why that was. And my only reference point was the right hand of God, so, which I neglected to write down. Let me look that up real fast. I just make it up as I go along. Okay, so in Theology Thursday, on a theological ministry school's website, it says the right hand is seen as a place of honor and status throughout the biblical text. When the Bible makes statements that Jesus Christ sits at the right hand of the Father, it is affirming that he has equal status to the Father within the Godhead. Well, that sounds about right, that the goddess would stand behind me on the right. But she, in my worldview, she does not sit at the right hand of anyone. People sit at the right hand of her. Or not people, but other deities, other aspects, other goddesses. So, the next article I cited in my research, that's just how it's going to be, guys. It's just going to be me reading things to you. I trust that's okay. You don't have to go look this stuff up yourself. So there's a writer for the Huffington Post News named Antonia Bloomberg, and she posted this article on July 17, 2014, called Sophia, the Christian Mystic's Path to Wisdom. So Antonia tells us, Radu Ayacob, a religious scholar of the University of Leuven, concurs that theologians throughout history have often understood wisdom to be a feminine being who contains both human and divine traits. That tracks. That tracks for me. In some cases, Jacob writes, wisdom was personified in a feminine nature as the divine consort of God, because of course, Christians, or later as the eternal feminine. The Stoics understood Sophia as, quote, knowledge of the divine and the human, end quote, which they regarded as a, quote, crucial underpinning for the goal of leading a moral life, end quote. So I have another interjection. It's brief. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about morality, and I think when I talk about morality, it's about like my own personal code. Like if you ever watched Dexter, he had a code. I have a code. You have a code. She has a code. He has a code. Everybody you know has a code, whether they know it or not. And that is their own kind of moral compass, we often refer to it as. But my moral compass came from the goddess. The morals that I have, the morals that I try and live by, are the morals that she has instilled within me. Okay, that's the end of my interjection. Back to Antonia, who goes on to tell us, oh yeah, there's another poem. The 11th century abbess and Christian mystic Hildegard of Bingen, she was also the one at Judy Chicago's dinner party, also revered Sophia and described her as the encompassing energy of God. In a prayer to Sophia, Bingen wrote, "You of the whirling wings, circling, encompassing energy of God, you quicken the world in your clasp. One wing soars in heaven, one wing sweeps the earth, and the third flies all around us. Praise to Sophia. Let all the earth praise her." Yeah. With one wing in heaven and one on earth, Hildegard writes, Sophia, quote, quickens the world. In Old English, the word quicken referred to giving life and coming into life. Thus, Hildegard suggests the world comes alive through Sophia. Now, in that description, it does sound like Sophia is a goddess, not just a concept. Oh, and here's more about the dinner party. I forgot that this was in this article, and I kind of bumbled through the whole dinner party thing earlier, but here's what Antonia says. Sophia appears at the dinner party by Judy Chicago, first displayed in the 1970s, thought to be the first epic feminist art installation by many, in the form of a single flower, echoed in both her plate and runner. According to Chicago, Sophia's presence at the table represents the downfall of female power, particularly religious power. It is also meant to convey Sophia's historical transformation in society from a goddess of wisdom and female strength to a purely spiritual image that plays a secondary role to the male figures of Christianity. That's what Chicago wrote in her book, Embroidering Our Heritage. At one time, Sophia was worshipped as the female aspect of God and as a creative force in the universe. But, like so many other goddesses, her original identity has either been lost or merged into other religious traditions. The place setting depicts one of the many incarnations of the goddess of wisdom and her transformation in popular culture throughout history. So, I guess I don't really care if Sophia is a goddess or a deity or a concept or an idea or a theology. I know that for me, you have heard me refer to the goddess that I worship as the diamond god. And I believe that Sophia is just another aspect of the goddess herself, that primordial goddess that I pray to and worship and sing love songs to. I think Sophia fits right in and is in good company. So that's the deal with Sophia. And you guys know me, I could go on and 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 on about what that means to me, what my emotional experience of Sophia is. But rather than doing that, I'm going to move on to the Shekinah, which you may or may not have heard of. Shekinah, which has many, many, many different spellings. But I typically use this one, which is Shekinah. And Shekinah is the English transliteration of a Hebrew word that means dwelling or settling. Dwelling or settling. And it denotes the presence of God, as it were, in a place. Like people talk about, church being the quote unquote house of the Lord. So that this concept of Shekinah is present in all Abrahamic religions, but particularly in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So I found this guy, Edward Durand, Durand, and he wrote this feature article in an online newsletter. I guess it's a newsletter called Braided Perspectives in July 28, 2020. Here's what our friend Edward says. Originally, Yahweh was spoken of as having a wife, Asherah, and we'll talk a little bit more about Asherah and the destruction of the shrines to Asherah. There was a common blessing around the time of Solomon, which was blessed be whoever by Yahweh and his Asherah, implying that Yahweh owned Asherah. As Raphael Patai said in his book, The Hebrew Goddess, he says, quote, of the 370 years during which the Solomonic Temple stood in Jerusalem, for no less than 236 years, the statue of Asherah was present in the temple. Hanging out with Sophia, I guess. And her worship was part of the legitimate religion, end quote. The Bible has references to the goddess. For some of them, you have to go back to older sources than the King James Bible. There's a lot of versions of the Bible before the King James Bible, if you did not know that. So the Wycliffe Bible she speaks in the book of Proverbs 8:23 and 8:30. She says, from without beginning I was ordained, and from eld times before that the earth was made, I was making all these things with him. End quote. From without beginning, she has no beginning. She was ordained before the earth was made, which I would suggest implies that she made the earth. And that line bugs me. I was making all these things with him. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that the with him was entered into the text at some ancient point when the focus became on male god iconography and symbolism. That's just a guess. I could be wrong. But I would not be surprised if some academic out there discovered that, yes, that's true, that it didn't always say I was making all these things with him. And instead it said I was making all these things. But again, that's just my conjecture. I don't know that for a fact. The Elohim, Elohim, it's a term I've heard before because I've studied the Kabbalah a little bit. Kabbalah magic, anyway. The Elohim were said to have made mankind in their own image. Elohim is a plural word. The singular is Eloah, which is the feminine form of El, E-L, Lord or God. It's related to the word Allah and the words Alat and Elat, which pre-Mosaic peoples of the Middle East used to refer to sacred unity and as the great goddess. So, little aside about this book that I'm going to read to you from. I bought this book about the Shekinah called The Cosmic Shekinah, A History of the Goddess of the Old Testament and Kabbalah. And I've had that book for, I don't know, a really long time. I think it was published in 2010. Interestingly, I kind of put it away and it's on a bookshelf somewhere. I have many bookshelves. Didn't think about it for the longest time until I did this episode. So then I brought it up on my Kindle and I see that one of the co-authors is Sarita de Este. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Sarita de Este. And I came across Sarita de Este within the last few years because she opened and founded a Covenant of Hecate sanctuary in New York. I'm not sure exactly where in New York, but it's in New York. So, that is all about, obviously, it's all about Hecate. And I just thought it was really interesting. I was like, Sarita Este was all over the Shekinah, 10, 12 years ago. So, anyway, just weird. You can look her up, Sarita Este, Sorita, lowercase d apostrophe Este. She's also written a ton of books about Hecate. She wrote Tending Her Sacred Fires, and she's got information out there online about Hecate liminal rites. She is a devotee of Hecate, and yeah, she's great. And I don't know, it was just, to me, it was interesting to look at this book I haven't looked at for years and years and years and realize everything in my life really does come together eventually. It just takes me a while to realize it. I had no idea how important that book would be to me 11 years later than it was when I initially looked at it. So that was probably in my quest for a goddess religion or a goddess cult in the US that I could run away and join, or Canada. Canada's close enough that I could go there too. So you can settle in, grab a blankie and a cup of coffee if you want. I'm going to read a few pages from the Cosmic Shekinah, the history of the goddess of the Old Testament and Kabbalah. And at this stage, I'm looking at my recording time and I'm thinking, this discussion about both Sophia and the Shekinah may have to be a two-part episode. And if you're out there, my goddess-loving friends, and you're listening, and you know anything about Sophia or the Shekinah, and would like to come and talk about it on the show, so it's not just me here reading books to you, get in touch. You can leave a comment on my social media pages, which is just Instagram and TikTok, or you can send an email to thegirlfriendgod@gmail.com. Again, knowledgeable people about either Sophia or the Shekinah or both, come and talk to me. Okay, so this is the beginning of the first chapter, which starts with a quote, which is, "I learnt it all, hidden or manifest, for I was taught by wisdom, by her whose skill made all things." And that's from the Wisdom of Solomon. I referred to this earlier. 1st century BCE. So there it is again, that her whose skill made all things. That sounds like the original OG goddess to me, the one who created things before things were even things, and everything that came before those things. Did you follow that? So, okay. The Shekinah is the primordial light of creation, the heavenly glory of divine wisdom, and the inspiration for prophecy. She is also the world soul, manifest through the divine sparks of her light, which comprise human souls and thus unites us all. With roots in the wisdom goddesses of the ancient world, the Shekinah is the manifestation of feminine divinity from the unnamed wisdom goddess of the Old Testament, found in the Jewish mystical systems known as the Kabbalah and in Merkava mysticism. I have a comment, which is that she refers to her as the world soul, which in Latin is anima mundi, and that is often how dedicants of Hecate refer to Hecate as anima mundi, the soul of the world. So I wonder when, maybe I could reach out and get her to come on the show. I wonder when Sarita would have abandoned the Shekinah for Hecate. Or maybe, like me, she believes that they are one and the same, right? That all goddesses make up the one, the source, the creator. Okay, just moving on. The name Shekinah first appeared in material found in the Onkelos Targum, which dates from the 1st and 2nd century CE. This text, by an unknown author, was misnamed during the medieval period after Onkelos the proselyte, who translated the Bible into Aramaic. In the Onkelos Targum, the term Shekinah is used to illustrate a divine presence which is separate from Yahweh, as in this paraphrase of Exodus 25:8. And they shall make before me a sanctuary, and I shall cause my Shekinah to dwell among them. The first glimpse of the power or function of the Shekinah is seen in the meaning of her name, which is derived from the Hebrew root shakan, meaning to dwell. This meaning hints at her tangible presence as a visible manifestation of the light of wisdom in the books of the Old Testament, as the burning bush seen by Moses, in the Ark of the Covenant, and in the Temple of Solomon. Her name was also Aramaized to Shekinta, Shekinta, in some texts like the Targums, which are Aramaic translations of the Bible that often included commentaries. The Shekinah is first hinted at as the unnamed wisdom goddess of the books of the Old Testament, as well as being named in apocryphal, sorry, I never use these words, apocryphal and pseudo-epigraphical, got that one, pseudo-epigraphical books from the latter part of this period spanning 1,000 years, from the 7th or 6th century BCE through to the 3rd or 4th century CE. Whilst it has been suggested that the Shekinah was simply a hypostasis of God's glory, personifying his qualities, the traces found in these ancient writings make it clear that she was much more than this. So, the Shekinah is just another kind of commodified goddess figure rewritten as history is written down, eventually phasing her out, because I'm fairly certain that if you go to a Christian mass today, no one is going to be talking about the Shekinah. Can you feel my frustration, my friends? Yeah. But this is why we study history, right? This is why we go back to ancient history, because there is an ancient history, and there is history prior to the Greeks and Romans. So the book goes on to say, by exploring the myths and deities of the ancient Middle East, it becomes clear that the origins of the Shekinah may be found in several earlier goddesses associated with wisdom in civilizations such as those of Sumer, Egypt, and Canaan. So I did quite a bit of research into her different manifestations, and pretty much everything that I researched on my own is in this Cosmic Shekinah, A History of the Goddess of the Old Testament and Kabbalah book. I know that she has numerous representations, some of which are the serpent, fire, like the burning bush of the Shekinah. Interestingly, the Shekinah is also seen as a dove. And who else is associated with the dove, boys and girls? Well, that would be the Virgin Mary. So let's talk a little about Asherah. There are some disputes about the historical accuracy of biblical descriptions of Jewish slavery in Egypt. primarily how it's described in Exodus. But what we do know is that there was a Jewish presence in Egypt. Large numbers of Jews settled there. It would seem that a large number of Jews went into exile in Babylon following the destruction of Judah. And then they became known as the Babylonian Jews. So here's a little bit about Asherah and the cosmic Shekinah. States the significance of the goddess Asherah to the early Hebrew tribes is clearly illustrated in the fact that 40 references to her remain in the Old Testament. And you guys, goddesses are everywhere in the Old Testament. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's true. Sometimes disguised, sometimes diminished, but the goddess is there. For certain, the goddess is there. And we could talk about Mary Magdalene, but that's a whole other thing. I digress. So these references remain in the Old Testament books despite numerous changes to the writings as monotheism took over as the dominant religious style, and the goddess Asherah was otherwise excised from religious practices. So in other words, they were polytheists, then they were kind of forced into monotheism. At least that's how I see it. The divine feminine, however, was too important to be fully banished, and she soon reemerged as the unnamed wisdom goddess. The wisdom goddess drew on precedents from other cultures the Hebrews had been exposed to. This is a quote, seeing wisdom as an Israelite reflection or borrowing of a foreign mythical deity, perhaps Ishtar, Astara, or Isis, end quote. And I believe that quote comes from Wisdom, Myth, and Mythology, an essay in understanding theological tradition written by Burton L. Mack, 1970. Back to Sarita speaking. Following the period where the wisdom goddess occurred in texts, around the 3rd century BCE to the 2nd century CE, came the naming of wisdom as the Shekinah in the 1st, 2nd century CE, Onkelos Targum. I mentioned Onkelos Targum. So that's the second time I've mentioned that, so I guess I'll tell you what that is. So the Onkelos, Onkelos, Targum, that is the primary Jewish Aramaic translation of the Torah. That is Onkelos Targum, apparently also known as Targum Onkelos. Contemporary with the Shekinah and drawing on some of the same earlier sources, we see the Gnostic wisdom goddess Sophia. So there's your link between Sophia and the Shekinah and Asherah. There are many parallels between these two goddesses. See, she calls Sophia a goddess. Parallels between these two goddesses which suggest cross-fertilization of ideas it seems apparent that both the Shekinah and the Sophia influenced perceptions of the Christian Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary, seen in textual references to titles and motifs. The Islamic figure of Shekinah is clearly derived from the Shekinah, both through her name and also the references to her in the Quran. Ancient textual evidence does not link the Sumerian goddess Lilith to the Shekinah. Okay. Didn't say that it did. By the way, that's also an upcoming episode. We're going to talk a lot about Lilith with an author who writes for Girl God Books. I'm very excited about that, but no spoilers. Well, I suppose that was a spoiler, right? That it's going to be about Lilith, but anyway, that's going to be good. Anyway, so before I run out of time, I want to talk a little about Asherah, because I promised you Sophia, the Shekinah, and Asherah. So Asherah, I found this really great journal article that was published in the Journal of Biblical Literature, Volume 105, Number 3, September 1986, written by John Day. Again, that's the name of the article is Asherah in the Hebrew Bible and Northwest Semitic Literature. You know, and you thought journal articles weren't exciting. So let me clarify something because I'm going to use this word a lot. Ugaritic, Ugaritic, is an extinct Northwest Semitic language. It's an extinct language, a dead language, if you will. I'm going to have to look into this more because I'm just cursory browsing the internet and I see something that says Ugarit was an ancient port city in northern Syria in the outskirts of modern Latakia. And it was discovered by accident. I will have to get more into that. Discovered by accident in 1928 together with the Ugaritic texts. Super interesting because it was excavated. The excavation began in 1928 and continues apparently. It's interesting to me how we discover not only figurines and ancient runes, but that we also occasionally get lucky and uncover texts that shed a whole new light, sometimes leading us to the conclusion that that we've gravely misunderstood something. So I think that's fascinating, and in my personal worldview with my head honcho goddess, I think that those discoveries are certainly divinely inspired. So, back to this journal article. Let's see what John Day, the guy's name is John Day. Let's see what John Day has to say. Okay. Until the discovery of the Ugaritic texts in 1929 and subsequent years, it was common for scholars to deny the very existence of the goddess Asherah, whether in or outside of the Bible, and many of those who did accept her existence wrongly equated her with Astarte. Since the discovery of the Ugaritic texts, however, no one can deny that there was a Canaanite goddess, Asherah, independent of Astarte, And it is generally accepted that this same goddess appears a number of times in the OT. I don't know. Oh, in the original text. I think that's what OT means. Help me out, academics. Though even today, still, there are a few scholars who refuse to face the facts. So just a brief note about this Astarte that he's talking about. Astarte is the Greek name for Ashtart, who, along with Asherah and Anath, was one of the three great goddesses of the Canaanite pantheon. So the Canaanites had a whole pantheon, and there were three goddesses in it. So just to kind of drive home what we talk a lot about on this show, that, the gods and goddesses of the Greeks and Romans were not original to them. They were kind of co-opted from those who came before them. So these are all like Hellenized forms of ancient Near Eastern goddesses. So, for example, Astarte is a Hellenized form of Ashtart, and the Greek equivalent of that is Aphrodite, and the Roman equivalent of that is Venus, and the Sumerian equivalent of that is Inanna. Same goddess. So, in the Hebrew Bible, in Book of Kings, which is also, believe that Book of Kings is books Kings 1 and 2 in the Christian Old Testament, same book. But in there, and I'm not sure exactly where, I was unable to track that information down. But in the Book of Kings, uh, we're told that a statue of Asherah was housed in Yahweh's temple in Jerusalem, and that female temple personnel wove ritual textiles for her in that location. So, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier or not. The other symbolism and iconography associated with Asherah was a tree, and they would make Asherah poles, kind of like a maypole, but not really. Um, anyway, so in the Kings chapter in the Old Testament, there's also that line about, and if you've heard anything about Asherah before, you already know this, that in Kings 23:6, it says, the king removed the Asherah pole from the Lord's temple. I would presume that's that temple in Jerusalem, and took it outside Jerusalem to the Kidron Valley, where he burned it. Then he ground the ashes of the pole to dust, and threw the dust over the graves of the people. He also tore down the living quarters of the male and female shrine prostitutes. Okay, I don't know how they knew they were prostitutes, but, they turned Mary Magdalene into a prostitute too, so who knows? Female shrine prostitutes that were inside the temple of the Lord, where the women wove coverings for the Asherah pole. So I guess that's where they wove their textiles. Anyway, so I'm getting a little riled up about it, right? I despise the rewriting of history, though I understand that as a human race, we are moved by things like fear and ego and pride and all that stuff. All that stuff that for me really doesn't jive with that moral code we talked about earlier. At least not mine, but we are humans, and as humans, I think we do the best that we can. And those of us on a goddess path or any other spiritual path, we do try and rise above that. And that's the goal, right? To be, in simplest terms, to be a good person, knowing that, perfection of that is never something that we're going to accomplish, but we signed up to strive for it anyway, right? At least that's my theory on what spiritual people do. So, coming up on time. I promised you Sophia, Asherah, and the Shekinah, and I managed to deliver all three. So, look at me, podcast host. Look at me, who can't pronounce ancient words. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me. Stay tuned, and I will talk to you next week. Hey, thanks for listening. New episodes drop every Saturday, so keep tuning in. You can also find The Girlfriend God on social media, both on TikTok and Instagram, hashtag The Girlfriend God, hashtag The Girlfriend God Podcast. Again, thanks for listening, liking, sharing, and following. The Girlfriend